Hello everyone, and welcome to today's Sutta class. We will start as usual with the Namo Tassa. Feel free to join if you like. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. So, hello everyone and welcome to today's Sutta class. Special welcome also to Geeta, who has posted quite a lot already in the chat. Really nice to see you after such a long time. Very happy that you have the opportunity to be with us today, and welcome to everyone else who has checked in or who is just listening without typing. Good to see you all. So, for the last 2 weeks, we didn't have a Sutta class on Tuesdays. Sorry about that. 2 weeks ago, I was sick, so I had to cancel last minute. And then last week, I was actually traveling. And so last week, I also couldn't make it for the class. And last week, I went to visit some other monasteries. I went to visit some friends of mine at the Sri Sampano Monastery, close to Hanover in the north of Germany. That's a very, very lovely Bhikkhuni community there. Very good place to visit if you have the opportunity. And then we all went together to another monastery to visit Germany's oldest Bhikkhuni. She is a nun who has been ordained for almost 40 years. So that is quite amazing. Her name is Ayya Dhamma, or Venerable Dhamma. She prefers to go by Venerable instead of Ayya, so Venerable Dhamma. And she has a place in the middle of Germany called Hassel Monastery. And she is a really, really inspiring, really amazing person. She had her Samaneri ordination in 1984 and her Bhikkhuni ordination in 1988. So that makes her probably the oldest Western Bhikkhuni, or the Bhikkhuni who is the longest ordained, the most senior one, and definitely one of the most senior Theravada Bhikkhunis in the world at all, overall, including the Asian countries. So it was really, really inspiring to meet her. We had such a good time. We really, really learned a lot from her. So if you have the opportunity, go and visit her. And so today I just wanted to share a little bit of the inspiration that I had meeting her, talking a bit about her background, and then also we will read a sutta together from the Sutta Nipata. And so Ayya Dhamma, or Venerable Dhamma, isn't that well known. She is quite reclusive. I think many of you maybe have never heard of her, because she practices in a tradition that is called the hermit's tradition. And the hermit's tradition actually isn't that well known, I believe, in Buddhist circles. I hadn't really heard about it, I hadn't really heard that much about it before I met her. And so usually when we talk about the traditions, we talk about, well, the city or village tradition and the forest traditions. For example, the Thai forest tradition, that is quite well known, but of course there are forest traditions in all of the Asian countries. So the forest traditions, usually we associate that with very strict Vinaya practice, with the ascetic practices, with a strong focus on meditation, very, very strong commitment to this kind of hardcore meditation practice. And then we have the city or village practice, and often we associate that more with like social services or social works or teaching, or we associate that with intensive study, for example, of the sutta, study of the Abhidhamma, and so on. These are usually the two traditions, the study tradition and the forest tradition or the Vinaya tradition. that we typically sort of separate from each other. And of course, this is not a very clear line. Obviously, there are people in the village, like monastics in villages or cities, that keep very, very strong Vinaya, that are very committed to meditation practice. And obviously also in the forest traditions, there are people that study a lot, that have a very profound knowledge of Abhidhamma or of the suttas. So it's definitely not a very clear separation line there, but typically the forest tradition tends to focus more on practice and tends to focus more on Vinaya, and the city tradition tends to focus more on providing services to the lay people or on study and those kind of things. So it was very interesting to me to hear about this other tradition, the hermits tradition. And obviously this hermits tradition has been there since the Buddha's time. It's just not that well known. In Asian countries, it has always been there. But also from the very earliest times when Western people started to ordain, there were always people who were quite strongly attracted to that kind of lifestyle. And so it seems that especially German monastics were quite drawn to this kind of lifestyle. So the first German monk to be ordained is quite famous. His name is Bhante Jnanatiloka. He was ordained in the very early 20th century, I think in 1904. And he was the second Western monk to be ordained in the Theravada tradition at all, and the first German monk to be ordained. And he considered himself to be a hermit monk. And of course, his famous student, Bhante Nyanaponika, who did a lot of translations, both into English and into German, and he also wrote a lot of texts. He also considered himself a hermit monk, and both of them lived very, very reclusive lives. And also nuns, not only monks, but also nuns were really very drawn to this tradition. There was a very, very early German nun, maybe the first Western nun, Western Theravada nun, I'm not sure, but certainly one of the very first Western Theravada nuns. Her name was Sister Upalavanna. She also went to Sri Lanka, and she was ordained in 1926, so almost 100 years ago, as a 10-precept nun, because obviously back in the day there was no bhikkhuni ordination in the Theravada tradition. So she was a German, and she lived in Sri Lanka in a cave for many, many years. She spent her whole life in Sri Lanka. She lived in that cave until she was well over 90, I think until she was 92 or 93 years old. And only the last 2 or 3 years of her life she spent actually in a city, because she was no longer able to live by herself in that cave, because conditions were really quite ascetic there. And at her advanced age, she was no longer able, but she also had a very interesting life story and was also a follower of this hermit tradition. And then, of course, as I already mentioned, Venerable Dhamma, who we visited last week, was also a practitioner, or is also a practitioner in that tradition. And she was a student of Bhante Nyanaponika. He trained her for 7 years, the last 7 years of his life, until he passed away. And so she had a lot of very inspiring teachers, and she obviously had a very strong grounding in that tradition. Before eventually, after many years in Asian countries, she came back and started a monastery in Germany, a monastery in this hermit tradition. And so, as I already mentioned, the hermit tradition is very inspired by suttas such as those that are found in the Sutta Nipata, where we have this ideal of the silent sage who practices alone in the forest without a community. Is similar to how the very, very earliest monks and nuns practiced. Like we know when the Buddha just started teaching after his enlightenment, most of the people who joined his Sangha were actually already spiritual practitioners. So it's what some of them obviously were lay people that converted, but many of them were spiritual practitioners from other ascetic movements or from other religious movements who had already gone forth with other teachers and then converted to Buddhism. So who were already quite familiar with the mendicant lifestyle and who like to be out in nature, who practiced alone in forests, in caves, by themselves. And so there are a lot of suttas in the Sutta Nipata that talk about this ideal. And this kind of ideal is very inspiring to the hermit tradition, and that is the kind of lifestyle that they want to lead. And so we were very, very fortunate to meet Ayya Dhamma, to meet Venerable Dhamma. She took a lot of time, she spent a lot of time with us, even though usually she's a hermit and doesn't spend that much time with visitors. She spent a lot of time with us, and she shared a lot of stories from her life and the way the hermit tradition practices and what inspires her, and about her teachers. And it was really, really good to meet her. And so what was interesting also obviously all was interesting for us, but what was especially interesting for us was to try to understand about this hermit tradition and how it differs from the Vinaya tradition, because obviously in the forest or Vinaya tradition, people also go into the forests. They also like to focus strongly on meditation and so on. So the way she explained the difference between those forest monasteries, for example, in the Ajahn Chah lineage from Thailand, or the Ajahn Mun, generally the Ajahn Mun lineage that split into the Ajahn Mahaboa's tradition, Ajahn Chah's tradition, and so on, and the hermit tradition that she follows. So what is the difference there? And the way she explained it is that in Vinaya traditions, obviously, I think many of you have been to monasteries that practice in this way, especially the Ajahn Chah tradition is quite famous in the West. They have a lot of monasteries, but there is also quite a strong focus on community practice, actually, not that much on practice by yourself. So many of those monasteries have quite a tight schedule. Usually there will be group sittings in the morning and in the evening. So group meditation, group chanting. Then there would be a work period where people come together, have a meeting every day where work is distributed and they work together for a few hours. Then, of course, the meals are communal. So people come together for all the meals. And sometimes people gather again in the evening for some kind of socializing event. Obviously, there are some kind of afternoon allowables, and then people come together and exchange about their day or exchange about the Dhamma and so on. So actually, even though it seems like it's quite secluded, and of course it is very secluded from ordinary society, the community itself that lives in the monastery actually has quite a lot of interaction with each other. Whereas in the hermit tradition, it's not at all like this. They don't have group sittings, they don't have group chantings, they don't have group meals. It's really like you're most of the time really by yourself. So the focus is somewhat different. The focus is really on your individual practice instead of doing group practices. And obviously also if you have a very strong Vinaya tradition, then that also requires a very strong regulated environment. So you need to build a proper monastery, you need to have a lot of lay support, and the lay people really need to understand what they need to do in order to support this monastery and to support the Vinaya practice of the monastics. So food needs to be offered in a specific way, like in the proper way, otherwise the monastics can't eat it. Food needs to be prepared by lay people and so on. The monastics don't cook. Also, the monastics don't drive cars. So whenever they need to go somebody, the lay people need to drive them. The monastics don't handle money. So lay people need to arrange everything in a very specific way. Financially for the monastery, there's very little interaction between men and women or between different genders in strict Vinaya monasteries. So there's also quite a lot of, burden or quite a lot of requirements asked of the lay people so that the monastics themselves can keep their Vinaya. And that, of course, requires a strong group and that requires a lot of commitment from all sides. And also a lot of training, both of the monastics and of the lay people. Whereas if you follow the hermit's tradition, then obviously you're alone. And sometimes maybe you're wandering, maybe you don't have a properly established monastery, maybe you just live in a kuti in the forest, or you wander around as the early Sangha did, which means that you come in contact with a lot of different lay people. And some of them, or many of them, will not even be Buddhist, especially if you don't live in a Buddhist country, especially if you live in a Western country. So the amount of commitment that the people around you have to Dhamma practice or to supporting you as a monastic is a lot less. So the hermit tradition sort of obviously takes Vinaya seriously and does keep Vinaya, but doesn't keep Vinaya quite to the same extent as is required in the Vinaya tradition, because simply their environment isn't that much conducive or isn't specially structured to provide a very strong Vinaya focus. So the hermit's tradition is willing to relax some of the smaller rules a little bit as is required by the situation in order so that they can do this practice alone in solitude. So that is somewhat the difference between the Vinaya tradition and the hermit's tradition. And another difference also obviously is that if you are a practitioner in the hermit's tradition, then obviously you need to have a lot of self-motivation. You need to be very focused on your own practice. You need to be very clear what you want to do, because if you're all by yourself, it's very easy for all your defilements to act up, and you feel lazy and you don't want to meditate and you just want to waste your time and do something else and get distracted. Whereas if you practice in a Vinaya monastery or in a forest monastery with a very strict schedule, then no matter if you feel lazy or you don't really feel like practicing today or you just want to do something else, there is a schedule and you just have to follow the schedule. So you'll still get up, you'll still do all the meditations, you'll still do all the chanting, you'll still do all the work in the monastery. And basically, just because there's a schedule and because there are a lot of practitioners around you, you kind of get dragged along, and whether you want to practice or not, you're basically forced to practice. So you don't need quite the same amount of dedication and focus and self-motivation as would be necessary if you practice all by yourself as a hermit. So that is another difference between the hermit's tradition and the Vinaya tradition. And so obviously there's not one tradition that is better than the other. It's just people are different, and some people thrive when they have a group around them, and other people thrive when they sort of can practice by themselves. So it's really good. And I think we know even from the suttas that people practiced in many different ways, and that the Buddha was very supportive of people practicing in the way that is conducive to them. There wasn't a one-size-fits-all, even in the Buddha's time. So there shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all in modern times, because people are still different in the same way that they were different in the Buddha's time. So it's good that we have all these different traditions. And I think it's really good that we can learn from each other. And to me, it was really interesting to meet Venerable Dhamma and to hear about this tradition. And I think that was really, really very inspiring. So, and one of the things that she shared with us visitors of her monastery was the suttas that inspire her. And obviously, as I already mentioned, the suttas that inspire her or that inspire the hermit's tradition are mostly found in the Sutta Nipata. And today we want to read one of those suttas together. And that sutta is called the Muni Sutta. This is Sutta Nipata 1.12. I have put a link in the live chat if you want to read along. And this is a sutta obviously that describes, or the sutta is called, the sutta is called the Sage, and it describes the lifestyle of an arahant, that is wandering alone, that lives alone, that practices this hermit's life. So this is a source of inspiration, obviously, for all practitioners, but especially for practitioners in the hermit's tradition. And obviously, not all hermits or not all monastics that kind of consider themselves to be following this hermit's tradition can live up to this ideal. Most of us are still practicing. Most of us are not arahants, but this is something to look up to. This is a role model. This is something that can inspire us and that can show us in which direction we want to develop. And so this is the sutta that we want to read together today. And I think the sutta is not that long, and it's also in the form of verses. So maybe the best thing is to read through the whole sutta in one go first, and then maybe we can talk about a few of the ideas that are expressed there in a little bit more detail. So let's read through first. As I mentioned, the sutta is called The Sage, and I'm reading from Bhante Sujato's translation. Peril stems from intimacy. Dust comes from a home. Freedom from home and intimacy. That is the sage's vision. Having cut down what's grown, they wouldn't replant, nor would they nurture what's growing. That's who they call a sage wandering alone, the great hermit that has seen the state of peace. Having assessed the fields and measured the seeds, they wouldn't nurture them with moisture. Truly that sage who sees the ending of rebirth has left logic behind and is beyond reckoning. Understanding all the planes of rebirth, not wanting a single one of them, truly that sage, freed of greed, need not strive, for they have reached the far shore. The champion, all-knower, so very intelligent, unsullied in the midst of all things, has given up all, freed in the ending of craving. That's who the wise know as a sage. Strong in wisdom, with precepts and observances intact, serene, loving absorption, mindful, released from chains, kind, undefiled. That's who the wise know as a sage. The diligent sage wandering alone is unaffected by blame and praise. Like a lion not startled by sounds, like wind not caught in a net, like water not sticking to a lotus. Leader of others, not led by others. That's who the wise know as a sage. Steady as a post in a bathing place, when others speak endlessly against them. Freed of greed, with senses stilled. That's who the wise know as a sage. Steadfast, straight as a shuttle, horrified by wicked deeds, discerning the just and the unjust. That's who the wise know as a sage. Restrained, they do no evil. Young or middle-aged, the sage is self-controlled. Irreproachable, he does not insult anyone. That's who the wise know as a sage. When one who lives on charity receives alms, from the top, the middle, or the leftovers, they think it is unworthy to praise or put down. That's who the wise know as a sage. The sage lives refraining from sex, even when young is not tied down, refraining from indulgence and negligence, freed. That's who the wise know as a sage. Understanding the world, the seer of the ultimate goal, the poised one who has crossed the flood and the ocean, has cut the ties unattached and undefiled. That's who the wise know as a sage. The two are not the same, far apart in lifestyle and conduct. The householder providing for a wife, and the selfless one true to their vows. The unrestrained householder kills other creatures, while the restrained sage always protects living creatures. As the crested, blue-necked peacock flying through the sky never approaches the speed of the swan, so the householder cannot compete with the mendicant, the sage meditating secluded in the woods. So, this is the sutta for today. Let's go through some of the stanzas here. I think overall it's very inspiring. As you can see, this is kind of the ideal that people on the path want to develop towards. Of course, it's difficult to reach, but if we don't even have a vision of where we want to go, then of course it's difficult to even know which direction to go to even make steps forward on the path. So this sutta is not intended to make us feel bad that we're not there yet. It's intended to really inspire us, to show us what is possible and where we should go, and that like what is worth working towards, what is worth putting in all the effort, doing all the meditations, practicing sila, practicing the path, and so on. So the sutta opens, of course, by showing us the danger in samsara, or the danger of household life, and tries to inspire us. Those of us that haven't gone forth yet, tries to inspire us to go forth. The sutta says, peril stems from intimacy, dust comes from a home. So I think this reminds us of other suttas. Most of you are well read in the suttas, so we know that peril stems from intimacy. Many of us might be thinking of the Piyajataka Sutta from the Majjhima Nikaya, which in English is called born from those who are dear. So how suffering comes from people who are close to us, because when we are in love with other people, or when we love other people, there's a lot of attachment there. And that can lead to a lot of suffering, as we all know, because something might happen to them, something might happen to us. Or we are madly in love with somebody and they don't love us back, or they love us back, but at some point they change their mind and feelings change and they fall in love with somebody else. So we all know how all this attachment leads to a lot of pain, suffering, and there's a lot of danger in this kind of intimacy with other people. And then dust comes from a home. Most of you probably know this standard reflection that is described in the suttas over and over. When somebody comes in contact with the Dhamma and then they reflect, household life is crowded and dusty, life gone forth is wide open, and then they reflect that they should also go forth and eventually make that decision and go forth. So this is how the gradual training, like the very first step on the gradual training, is always described, this reflection. Household life is crowded and dusty. But the life gone forth is wide open. You're out in nature. You can go wherever you want. You're entirely free. And so that here in this sutta is also the first step, this kind of reflection. Freedom from home and intimacy, that is the sage's vision. Then, having cut down what's grown, they wouldn't replant, nor would they nurture what is growing. So obviously this is not talking about planting crops or anything. This is obviously talking about planting defilements in our mind, or actually not planting defilements, removing the defilements that we have already planted in the past. So we're cutting down what is growing, or what has already grown, the defilements that are already there, we're trying to abandon, or we're actually abandoning, and we don't replant any new defilements, and we don't nurture those that are already there. We try to abandon them. So, and then, of course, this is also what they do, those sages wandering alone, and the great hermits that have seen the state of peace. So the state of peace, obviously, is Nibbana. And then, having assessed the fields and measured the seeds, they wouldn't nurture them with moisture. So this is a reference to another sutta. This is a reference to a sutta from the Anguttara Nikaya. This sutta is called Continued Existence, or Patamabhava Sutta in Pali. And in that sutta, the Buddha says to Ananda, deeds are the field, consciousness is the seed, and craving is the moisture. So deeds, or karma, or past karma, or actions are the field, consciousness is the seed, and craving is the moisture. So this describes the process of rebirth. And because we have past karma, there are fields where we can be reborn. Consciousness is that seed, so the consciousness that links one life to the next, that goes on and on from moment to moment and from life to life. That is the seed that is planted in a new field, in a field created by our karma. And then that consciousness grows into being, or the seed grows into a plant, the consciousness grows into being and gets properly established and has a full life in this particular field of rebirth because of craving, because the seed is watered, the craving waters the consciousness and makes the consciousness grow. But here, of course, when you are an arahant, then you don't have any more craving. So you don't nurture those seeds with moisture because the craving is no longer in your mind. So moisture obviously here is again in the same way, like from the Anguttara Nikaya, moisture again is an image for craving. So this round of rebirths comes to an end because there's no more craving in your mind. So the seeds don't grow anymore. And for that reason, the sage sees the ending of rebirth. And then also he has left logic behind, he's beyond reckoning, or not he, they have left logic behind and are beyond reckoning. Because you can't reach Nirvana by logical thinking, this is really something you need to experience directly in your mind. So you have to go beyond logic. Obviously, in the beginning, logic is good. Thinking about things, trying to really understand things is good. But eventually, you have to go beyond all of this and really make the experience yourself. Then understanding all the planes of rebirth, not wanting a single one of them, truly that sage, freed of greed, does not strive, for they have reached the far shore. So that sage understands all the planes of rebirth, not only the rebirths in the sensual realm where we live now as humans, where animals live, and some of the gods, and all of the hell beings and so on, but also all of the higher planes, the jhana plane, so the fine material plane, and the immaterial plane, because obviously you have developed very deep samadhi, you have developed the jhana states, so you understand what rebirth is like in those planes of existence. But you have gone beyond all that. You have also cut off all the attachment to jhanas, to those higher rebirths, to those Brahma realms. You don't want a single one of them because you see all of them are actually equally flawed. All of them are equally impermanent. All of them are equally full of suffering, and there is no permanent self there. So you let go of all of them. So that's why the sutta says you're freed of greed. You're not only freed of greed for the sensual material things, but you're freed of greed also for those extremely subtle states of mind in deep jhanas. And of course, they need not strive, for they have already reached the far shore. So for them, the work has ended. They have abandoned all the defilements. So right effort has also come to an end. They are now fully at peace. They no longer need to strive. And then the next one, the champion, the all-knower, so very intelligent, unsullied in the midst of things, has given up all, freed in the ending of craving. That's who the wise know as a sage. So here, the arahant is called the champion. Of course, an arahant is the only true champion. The champions that we know in the worldly sense, whatever, somebody who wins an Olympic medal or a soccer champion or whatever, boxing champion or whatever kind of champions we usually have, those aren't champions in the real sense because they're still full of defilements, full of attachment, full of craving. But the arahant is the one true champion because he has conquered really all the factors in the mind, everything that holds them back. They have really overcome all the defilements, completely purified in the mind. And so for that reason, they are unsullied in the midst of all things. Because usually when we are surrounded by things, we experience either craving, we experience attachment, or we experience aversion if we don't like those things. So our mind constantly gets dirtied, our mind constantly gets defiled by those things around us because they trigger all those responses in our mind. But of course, when you have let all that go, then you're entirely unsullied, no matter what kind of things samsara surrounds you with. Since you've let everything go, you can live there completely at peace. And then the sutta goes on, strong in wisdom, with precepts and observances intact, serene, loving absorption, mindful, released from chains, kind, undefiled. That's who the wise know as a sage. So this is also a very inspiring stanza, I think. So also has a lot of areas where we can develop our practice, very different areas, strong in wisdom. So obviously an arahant has perfected wisdom with precepts and observances intact. So that means precepts means they have very strong sila. Their sila also obviously is perfected. Observances are more like general monastic expectations on behavior, like all the, let's say, more minor Vinaya rules that don't necessarily have anything to do with ethical conduct, but it's more like the way we behave as monastics to make things easy and to have a serene, peaceful life and to show respect to each other. And then serene, obviously being equanimous, being peaceful inside, that comes from not being attached anywhere, that comes from deep meditation practice. Loving absorption, of course, this means practicing jhana, being mindful, being released from all chains, means having cut off all the fetters, having removed all the defilements in the mind. And then also the next adjective here is kind. And I think it's so lovely that kind was included here in this list, because sometimes when you think about this hermit's lifestyle, it seems like a very ascetic practice. It means very hardcore. You have to be very strong-willed. You have to kind of be hard on yourself, or it can seem like that would be the case. But actually, one of the very important characteristic traits of an arahant is also that they are kind, that they're full of metta, that they have developed the Brahma Viharas, and that they're not hard on themselves. They're actually kind to themselves and to other people, to all beings in the world. And so this hermit's lifestyle isn't actually a lifestyle where you try to punish yourself or to be hard on yourself. This is a lifestyle where you try to open your heart and be kind to all beings. And this hermit's lifestyle is just a means to an end. And we practice in this way, not because we hate ourselves, but because we love ourselves and because we want the best for ourselves. And of course, reaching Nibbana is the best thing that we can do for ourselves and for others, for the entire world. And so we think that the hermit's path is the best path for us practitioners who want to walk this path. And for that reason, we pick this path, not because it's hard, but because it's actually out of kindness we do this, not out of self-hatred or anything. So I think it's really good that this was included here, reminding us that kindness is a very important part of the practice also. And then the diligent sage, wandering alone, is unaffected by blame and praise. Like a lion not startled by sound, like wind not caught in a net, like water not sticking to a lotus. Leader of others, not by others led, that's who the wise know as a sage. So here now the next point that is talked about here is that somebody who is really liberated is unaffected by worldly blame and worldly praise. So we all know about the 8 worldly winds, or the 8 worldly dhammas, praise and blame, gain and loss, happiness and suffering, and so on. And usually when we are not liberated in the mind, then we are kind of affected by other people around us. When they praise us, we feel good. When they blame us, we feel bad. Often we feel pressure to do things that we don't really want to do because we want other people to praise us, or because we are afraid that other people might blame us if we don't. So many things in our life we actually don't do because we want them, because we want to do them, but because we are afraid that other people will have some kind of negative reaction if we don't do them. So we are pressured into doing stuff by other people. So we can't lead a free life. We can't fully make our own decisions. We are constantly kind of fettered to the opinion of other people. We're constantly triggered by that fear inside of us that other people might sort of be hostile towards us or sort of disapprove of us. But of course, when we are arahants, we have let go. We have understood that this is all kind of worldly stuff. People have different opinions and people praise you and blame you for whatever things. And this is not something you can control. This will happen all the time. And so you just let go of this dependency on others, of seeking to be praised by others and trying to avoid being blamed. So you can really be entirely free. You can really follow your own inner conscience and you can really make your own decisions. And when you think this is a good thing to do, then you do it. And when you think this is a bad thing to do, then you don't do it. And you're not forced into doing stuff just out of fear of how other people might react. So this is a major part of being free. And this is a major part of being able to only do wholesome things because your own inner conscience guides you and you're not guided by other people. So it's like a lion that is not startled by sounds, because obviously a lion, the king of the animals, doesn't have to fear other animals. Like wind not caught in a net, you try to catch wind, but wind just goes through. In the same way, you cannot catch an arahant. Arahants just are completely unaffected by your words, whether you praise them or you blame them. They're just completely free. The same way that wind is completely free. And like water that is not sticking to a lotus, water also just flows on. And arahants are leaders of, therefore, they are leaders of others. Like other people can take them as their role models and try to emulate them and try to follow them, but they are not led by others. So arahants don't take other teachers. Arahants have nothing further to accomplish, so they don't need to follow other people's opinions. So that's who the wise know as a sage. And then steady as a post in a bathing place when others speak endlessly against them, freed of greed, with senses stilled. That's who the wise know as a sage. This is very similar. You're steady as a post and others speak endlessly, and you're not shaken by whatever they say, whether this is good, whether this is bad. You just remain completely steady and you just remain focused on your own conscience. Steadfast, straight as a shuttle, horrified by wicked deeds, discerning the just and the unjust. That's who the wise know as a sage. So again, this is very similar. They are steadfast, they are straight as a shuttle. Sometimes this is also translated straight as a weaving shuttle. So if you have seen any of those ancient looms that they use to make cloth, you know that there is a small wooden part with the string attached that goes back and forth to make that cloth, basically, to add layers to that cloth. And of course, that shuttle needs to be completely straight, because if it's somehow warped, then it gets tangled up with all the other strings and then the whole cloth kind of gets messed up. So that's kind of the image here. It needs to be really, really straight, in the same way that Arahant has a really, really straight mind. And the Arahant can therefore clearly discern between what's wholesome and what's unwholesome. So I think I have to go a little bit faster. Okay, so let's go a bit faster. Restrained, they do no evil. Young or middle-aged, the sage is self-controlled. Irreproachable, they do not insult anyone. That's who the wise know as a sage. So of course, restrained, they do no evil. I think that's pretty clear. Young or middle-aged, the sage is self-controlled. So here the sutta tells us your physical age doesn't really matter. We've all been on this path for many, many lifetimes. So some people have karma that is strong enough that even when they're young in this life, they can already make very good progress on the path, can reach arahantship quite young. And if you practice in this way, then even when you're young, you're trying to be self-controlled. Sometimes we make a lot of excuses for young people, and when they misbehave in all sorts of horrible ways, we say, oh, well, yeah, it's just the hormones, or they're young and they have excess energy and therefore they behave in this and that kind of way. So they're drinking orgies and they sleep around and whatever, drunk driving and being really rude to other people or these kind of things. But here, obviously, if you really follow this path, then whether you're young or you're old, you just cannot behave in this way. And hormones or anything is not an excuse, because all this is just creating so much bad karma, and all this will be will create so many obstructions on your path that even when you're young, you can't behave in this way. And obviously, if you have very strong karma towards this kind of practice, then you have this very strong internal conscience in yourself, and you know that this isn't good for you, and you wouldn't behave in this way. So you would be self-controlled, you would be irreproachable, and you wouldn't give into anger or hatred, so you wouldn't insult anyone. When one who lives on charity receives alms from the top, the middle, or the leftovers, they think it unworthy to praise or put down. That's who the wise know as a sage. This is again a very strong practice. This is practicing with alms food. Obviously, hermits wouldn't cook themselves mostly. Especially in the Buddha's time, they didn't cook themselves. So they receive alms food from others. And whether they receive high quality food or just some random leftovers, their mind is entirely unattached. Their mind is entirely unattached to all material things, so obviously also to food. But food is singled out here and especially mentioned because when you live a monastic life, then you've already given up a lot of material pleasures, but sometimes food can be the one pleasure that is still there because you still need to eat. And so people can become quite attached to nice flavors and to having good food. But obviously, if you understand that this is just a material thing and you practice letting go, then your mind wouldn't evaluate the food in this kind of sense, and wouldn't think, finally I get some good food and this is delicious, and then you praise the lay people so that in the future they will make the same food for you again, or you criticize the lay people, and if you don't like the food, so they kind of get the message, so they wouldn't offer this again to you in the future. But of course, if you practice properly, then you think, this is unworthy of a monastic to behave in this way, and just, trying to influence lay people to give you some kind of material thing is not proper behavior for monastics. And like in the end, the food is there to sustain the body. It's not there to enjoy delicious tastes. That just leads to more attachment and more suffering. And then the next one, when one who lives on charity receives alms from the top. We have already read this one. Next one. The sage lives refraining from sex, even when young, is not tied down, refraining from indulgence and negligence, freed. That's who the wise know as a sage. So this is kind of the same idea that we had just now. Even when you're young, that's not an excuse to indulge in all kinds of unwholesome behaviors. Even when you're young, this is especially the time when you should practice, because you're full of energy and you can really make an effort to go forward on the path, and your body is still strong and you can still kind of endure more difficult conditions. So you can really bring up a lot of energy for the practice. So being young is the ideal time to practice. It's not an excuse to indulge in all sorts of unwholesome behaviors. Understanding the world, the seer of the ultimate goal, the poised one who has crossed the flood and the ocean, has cut the ties, unattached and undefiled. That's who the wise know as a sage. So again, this is obviously another description of the Arahant, understands the entire world. He has seen the ultimate goal, so Nibbana. He has crossed the flood and the ocean, obviously the flood of samsara, crossed over to the other shore, the shore of Nibbana. And then the last two stanzas The two are not the same, far apart in lifestyle and conduct. The householder providing for a wife or for a partner, and the selfless one true to their vows. The unrestrained householder kills other creatures, while the restrained sage always protects living creatures. And as the crested blue-necked peacock flying through the sky never approaches the speed of the swan, so the householder cannot compete with the mendicant, the sage meditating secluded in the woods. So here we have a direct comparison between household life and the life gone forth. So this ties back in with the very first stanza, where there was also this reflection: household life is crowded and dusty and full of attachments, and life gone forth is much preferable if you want to reach Nibbana. And again, it points out that in household life, you have to provide, you're not independent, you have to provide for your family, your partner, maybe if you have children, if you have parents, and so on. So you have a lot of responsibilities, also not just attachments, but also a lot of responsibilities for other people. You're not independent and free in the same way that you would be if you had gone forth. And then it says, householders kill other creatures. Obviously, that doesn't mean all kinds of householders do that. Many lay people obviously don't do that, especially Buddhists who keep precepts definitely don't do that or try not to do that. But it's just generally, if you look at who kills other creatures, usually that is householders. Hopefully that is not those people who have gone forth, because all of them should really be keeping precepts, keeping sila, and trying to develop universal loving kindness. So that is the thinking behind this stanza, not saying that all householders necessarily kill beings. And then, of course, as the peacock never approaches the speed of the swan, so householders can't make progress as fast or in the same way as you could if you were a hermit meditating alone in the forest. So here we have this image of two birds, two very beautiful and very inspiring and very majestic birds. One is a peacock and the other one is a swan. So a peacock, obviously, here is a symbol for the householder. A peacock has a very dazzling display of amazing colors and very beautiful feathers. And it's just like a very, very, very beautiful bird and very sparkly and so on. But it's all basically just show. It looks really good, but the bird can't do what a bird is supposed to do, so fly properly. So all their feathers that are usually used for flying have turned into obviously very, very beautiful feathers, but the feathers are no longer suitable for flying. They're just suitable for looking beautiful and attracting female peacocks. Whereas on the other hand, the swans are also very majestic birds, but swans don't go for all these dazzling colors. Swans are just plain white, and it's the simplicity that is really the beautiful thing in a swan. This clean, pure white color of that swan. And so swans obviously can fly much better because their feathers are still proper feathers that are suitable for flying. And so for that reason, the swan is here compared with a mendicant. And of course, if you make that commitment, if you go forth, if you practice secluded in the forest and give all your energy into the practice, then of course your progress would be much faster than if you were distracted by other things around you, as lay people tend to be, because they still have to make a living and look after their family and so on. So that is the end of the sutta. I hope you enjoyed it. This shows us a role model. This shows us basically an inspiration of what kind of person we could develop into if we practice this path further, and what kind of sort of mental qualities you have if you become an arahant, how arahants live their life, what kind of mindset they have. So I think this is really very, very beautiful and very inspiring. So I hope you liked this sutta. And then for now, we will finish the sutta class and I will have a look if there are any questions in the live chat. And I see that there was a lot of comments in the live chat already. So let me have a look. So let's see. So hello, everybody. Greetings to all. Good to see that so many have checked in. Gita says it's incredible that a female venerable lived in a cave till 92 years of age. Yeah, actually that was in Sri Lanka, close to Kandy. And as you know, Kandy is a little bit up in the hills. So it's not that hot. So it's much more conducive for the Westerners to live there. And yeah, she has a very amazing, very inspiring life story. And there is actually a little PDF booklet that was produced after she passed on by lay people in Sri Lanka. So if you want to Google it, then you can read a little bit more about her life story. And then Gita says, Ayya, can a lay female also live similar hermit lifestyle, live in ardent and resolute, practicing daily? I guess everybody could live in that way if they have the conditions and the supportive practice. So obviously, if you live a hermit lifestyle, the very definition of a hermit means that you need to live alone and somewhat secluded from society. So if you can do that as a layperson, then I don't see why you wouldn't be able to practice as a hermit. And then Gita says, especially in a cold country, life will need to be indoors due to the extremity of the elements. Yeah, so a hermit doesn't need to live in a cave, just means that you live by yourself. So as I mentioned, the Venerable Dhamma, who we visited in her monastery, this is a proper monastery. Actually, this is a village in the forest. So there's an entire village that has become a monastery. So they bought this entire village. The lay people bought this entire village and donated it to become a monastery. So it's like a little island and then surrounded by a lot of forest, many miles of forest in every direction. But obviously, they all live in the houses of this village. They don't live somewhere out in whatever, the jungle, because that's just way, way, way too cold in Germany, especially in winter. And Gita says the hermit's tradition sounds very practical. It is definitely very practical. That is one of the kind of defining features, I think, also of the hermit's tradition. Gita also said Tenzin Palmo, the female Tibetan bhikshuni, also lived in a cave for a long time. Yeah. Definitely, I mean, there are practitioners, I think, in all Buddhist traditions, not only in the Theravada, also in the Tibetan tradition, also in some of the Mahayana traditions. People have always been inspired by this ideal of that hermit. Also from China, we have a lot of stories of monastics living in this way. Because there's just something about this archetype that seems very inspiring to people, to our minds, that kind of just being out in nature and being all by yourself kind of just is very conducive to peace, to stillness, and to looking inwards and understanding more about yourself. So I think it's not surprising that all Buddhist traditions have people who live in this way. And then Richard says, Ayya, are there any similarities between a Pacceka Buddha and the hermit life? Obviously, there are many similarities between a Pacceka Buddha and the hermit life. Pacceka Buddhas also developed the path by themselves. The main difference is that a Pacceka Buddha arises when there is no Sammasambuddha there, when there is no teachings of a Buddha left anymore in the world. So they have to find the path by themselves without any proper guidance or without any proper teacher. So they need a lot more merits and a lot more dedication and focus to make progress. Whereas somebody like a Buddhist practicing in a hermit's tradition usually has access to the Buddha's teachings, like they have access to suttas or they have teachers. They have some kind of training, so they know which direction to go. They don't have to start from scratch without actually, like, they don't have to walk around in the dark, not knowing which direction to go to. They have a very clear idea how to practice in this way. So that's a major difference. So practicing as a follower of a Buddha is much easier than actually having to become a Pacceka Buddha. And then Facebook user says, are there any stream entry monks in today's world? I think there are stream entry monks and stream entry nuns in today's world. And they also say, I find the hermit tradition truly motivating and really in alignment with the original Buddha's style of living. Yeah, so as I mentioned, hermit's tradition can be quite inspiring for many people. And I'm glad that this was inspiring for you. There's also the question, is there an Arahant living in this world now? Who knows? I also cannot say. Traditionally, in Asian countries, many people believe that there are still some Arahants there. I think the best way is just let's practice ourselves and become our Arahants ourselves. And then we know that there's at least one in the world. Gita made an offering. Thank you very much, Gita. Very much appreciated. And then Dan says, I was thinking how lucky I am living in Sydney, going to Perth on Friday. I hope I can get untied from as many things to be free, at least for a month before then. So, sounds like you have the opportunity to go on a retreat in Perth. I assume that will be either with Ajahn Brahm or with the nuns community at Dhammasara. So that sounds absolutely lovely. I'm very happy that you have this opportunity. I wish you a wonderful stay and say hi to the monastics there from me. I think most of them might still remember me, hopefully. Such a lovely community there, and if anybody has the chance to go, then please go and visit. Then Facebook user also says, does cooking for oneself when living as a hermit cause any harm to oneself? Well, it depends on whether you make any bad karma while cooking for yourself. So if, for example, you kill, let's say, a chicken because you want to make chicken soup, obviously that would be harmful. If people donate vegetables to you and you just cook those vegetables, then probably that wouldn't be too harmful. I guess it depends also on your intention and depends on what kind of cooking you actually do. But the mere act of cooking itself obviously is karmically neutral, so doesn't necessarily cause any harm. Oh, we have so many comments today. That's really lovely. Seems like you really enjoyed this sutta. Very glad. So let's keep going a little bit more. Dan says, so lucky to be in contact with Dhamma. So with possessions, often we think we can use them because we may get some good thing, but the only good thing we can possess is good qualities. Exactly. And the only thing that is actually for our long-term benefit is the development of good qualities. So sometimes we have a very narrow focus. We just look at our short-term benefit. And so we focus on the wrong things in life. We have the wrong priorities. But if we take a long-term vision, then we see that actually putting a lot of effort into practicing the path, making that a priority in our life, and developing good qualities in the mind instead of developing material possessions is so much more important and so much more beneficial, both for ourselves and also for other beings around us. And Dan says, thank you, Ayya. Your talks and interior design sense. It's very inspiring to me. Haha. Okay, I'm not sure there's anything interesting about our interior design here. I'm literally just sitting on the floor in my very empty room. But I think maybe it's the emptiness that is very inspiring, because there's not much material stuff around me. And definitely for me, it's very inspiring. Every morning when I wake up and I see my empty room, I think I feel very, very blissful and very, very happy. So the less stuff you have, the happier you are. And I like, for me personally, that is definitely something that is very true. And Facebook user says, are there any specific Buddhas one keeps as ideal because Mahayana has many? Well, so I think the Buddha that is the most inspiring one is Sakyamuni Buddha, our Buddha, also called Gautama Buddha. That is the Buddha, the historical Buddha that lived 2.5 millennia ago. That is the Buddha whose Dhamma is still around, whose suttas we still have, whose teachings we still have. So he is the one who left us this Dhamma, and so he left us all these teachings that are inspiring us now. So I think he is the most appropriate to venerate. All the other Buddhas, we don't really know anything about them. And obviously we know that there were Buddhas before this Buddha, and there will be Buddhas in the future, and there will probably be Buddhas in other parts of the universe. But for us, the one important Buddha is this Buddha, because it's he who left this Dhamma that we have at the moment. So I think he is the most appropriate one. And so that was the last question for today. Okay, very good. So I wish Dan a very good retreat in Perth, and wish everybody else a wonderful rest of the day. We will finish for today with 3 sadhus. Feel free to join if you like. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And now have a wonderful rest of the day and have a good week. And I will see you all next week. Take care.